Okay, so far we've been working on our Tic Tac Toe game, and what we've ended up with is we've coded almost all of the buttons. So we've got 9 buttons here that will display an X or an O depending on whether we press an X or an O. We've also coded the Start Game button to clear all the buttons and reset and enable the buttons. But we haven't made the reset button yet. So I guess that's the next step here. So here we encounter something that you'll run into in other parts of this assignment, other assignments. You want to use one subroutine to call another subroutine. This is a very common programming practice, as you often have to do the same thing over and over again. Clever programmers don't write out big chunks of code. They create subroutines which do that job and then use a command like what we're about to use to call that subroutine from somewhere else in the program whenever they need that job done. In our case, each time a move is made, we need to check if someone has won the game. However, writing out this check after each move would be a massive amount of code. Instead, we're going to write it once in a subroutine called checking for a win, and we then can just put that single line in each of the buttons. However, what I want to do here is do the reset button. So let's do the reset button. So the reset button, I already have a chunk of code that sort of resets the game, and that's the form load. Let me see if I can find form load. So here's form load. Now it's only a couple of things it does. Clear button, disable the buttons, and button start is enabled. So if I want to do those things, also I think I should have put in here player X's turn is true, because we always start with player X. I didn't put it in there, and I'm not sure if I wanted to make the game start with sometimes X and sometimes O. I'm not sure, but I think it should always, anytime we start a game, it should be player X. So anyhow, back to the reset. So what I want to do is basically, I want in this subroutine do the same thing that another subroutine did, which was the form load here. And then the form load is going to call on other subroutines, such as clearing and disabling. So how do I do that? Instead of rewriting all that code, all I can do is make a call to form 1 and its load function. And I can just say me and new system.event args. And this is going to basically call form load. I have to tell form load. The reason I put this in is because I need to tell form load who's calling it. Okay, so now we're going to do the check win event. And so what I need to do is think about here, how can I possibly win? And I'm just going to do a little drawing on the screen, and I really wish I had another piece of software installed here so I could draw on top of the screen that you're looking at. But just to show you, if I want to look for a win, suppose I'm playing the game, a win could be, oops, let me just, a win could be if I've got button 1, button 2, and button 3 all the same. That's one way to win. Another way a win could happen is if the middle row, button 4, 5, and 6 are all the same. And another way a win could happen is if the third row is all the same. So there's 3 possible ways horizontally that can be a win. Now vertically, there's a couple of different ways. And so let me draw a vertical line here. So vertically, we could have a win if the button 1, button 3, and button 6, or button 2, 5, and 8, or button 3, 6, and 9. are all the same. So there's 1, 2, 3 vertical wins. Is there any other wins? And hopefully a student would say, yes, there is. There's also a diagonal way to win. So that's one way to win would be if these three are the same. And then finally, the last way that there could be a win is if the 3 going this way. So that means I need to check 8 different directions for a possible win. So if I was to do that in each button, that'd be a lot of code, wouldn't it? So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to make another sub called private sub check for a win. And all this subroutine is going to check those 9 if-then statements. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use if-then statements, and we're going to use the keyword and. And I haven't really talked about and in an if-then statement for making my condition a little bit more complex. But here I'll write it in English and see if this makes sense to you. Basically, I use the keyword if, and I'm going to say if button 1 is equal to button 2, and if that's true, and if button 2 is equal to button number 3, if that's true, then what I know from that is button 1 and button 2 and button 3 must all be the same. And this is how I write a complex if-then statement using the keyword and. The keyword and joins a statement. So for example, if button 1 and button 2 were X's, but button 3 was O, so that would be true. And suppose this was false, this if statement would be completely false because this is true, but this is not true. And means they're both joined together. So both conditions would have to be true for this statement to be true. And so this is how we're going to use the and statement to make much more complex conditions. So in other words, what has to happen is this part of the condition is now joined by using and to this part of the condition. So for example, a true and a false is false. A false and a true is false. A false and a false is also false. But a true and a false is true. And that's the only way it can be true is if, with the and statement, if I have a true and the other statement is also true. Okay, so hopefully that made sense to you. Maybe I didn't do the greatest job explaining it, but let me show you how it might look for the check win. What I might do is I might say if button1.text equals button2.text, and sometimes what I also like to do, it's not necessary, is I put these in brackets. So I can sort of say, okay, is this a true? And then I put the keyword here and I'm basically going to say the same. It doesn't matter in this case. I can say button 1 is also equal to button 3. So then button 1, 2, and 3 are all the same. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So if that is true, I can let me just message box game over, and I'll say button1.text, and I'll say is the winner. Now the nice thing about this is it doesn't matter if it's X is 1 or O is 1. It's going to say game over, and if button 1, 2, and 3 are all X's, it'll say X is a winner. But if 1, 2, and 3 are O's, it'll say O is a winner. So this is going to also sort of reduce the code. I don't have to check for X's and check for O's. This is going to check for alls. Okay, so that's one way I can do it. And basically, I can put in the 9 if-then statements. And so if you remember what I did for the next horizontal was button number 4 is equal to 5, and button number 4 is also equal to button number 4, 5, and 6 on that row. So that's now the second row down that I did. I can do the last row. So this is going to have 7, 8, and 9. So 7 is equal to 8, and 8 and 7 is also equal to 9. So now I've got all of the horizontal ones. And then I need to do the vertical buttons. So there was 3 vertical buttons. So button 1 is equal to button 4, and button 1 is also equal to button 7. So that's the first vertical, 1, 4, and 7. The next vertical row I want to check is button 2 is equal to 5. That's the one right below it. And button 2 is also equal to 8. And then finally the last row, vertical, is going to be 3, 6, and 9. 3 is equal to button 6, and button 3 is also equal to button number 9. I think I did that right. And then finally a diagonal. So diagonal would be button 1, button 5 in the middle, and button 9. So let's do that. So button 1 and button 5 and 1 and 9. And then I'll do the vertical the other way with 3, 5, and 7. And now I'm basically done. I'm just going to have to test the game. 3 is the same as 5, and 3 is also the same as, 5 is also the same as 7. So that now has it. So now what I need to do, so this big long code would have had to gone into each button. So now all I need to do is every time I press a button, so button 1, I play an X or an O, I disable it, and then finally the last thing I need to do is check for a win. And so I simply put a single routine in each button, and I can test to see if there's a win after I press each button. So it's getting a little bit long, but not really. And hopefully this works. So let me just test the code, and I think I've pretty well got a working game. The last thing I should probably do is after there is a win, I should display a line, appropriate line, and I should also probably disable the button so you can't keep playing. But that'll be for another game. So let me just quickly press play here, start the game. You'll see if I press reset, it's just like resetting. Now I start the game. Let's do X here. I'll have to figure out what the issue is. Anyhow, we're just about there. I made a mistake somewhere, but I will fix that in the next video.